Okay.
All right, here we go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your patience. We have our guest with us today, Warden Amory from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So thank you for waiting for us. We had some technical issues, as you'll see here. Warden Amory is connected from his pickup truck, so we got it done, though. My name's Nick, and if you haven't met me already, I work for the Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit, and we wouldn't be able to have this partnership today with the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Warden Amory if it wasn't for our partners at the Northwest PA Job Connect, our local workforce development board. So shout out to them and say thanks. Without further ado, we're going to send Warden Amory live, and we're just going to have a chat for about 15 minutes. And then towards the end, we'll field any questions from the audience, and you'll find that somewhere on your screen, there's a little bubble with a question mark in it. That's for you to submit any questions for Warden Amory. And towards the latter part of that, we will answer those questions. But don't hesitate to throw those questions in as Warden Amory is talking. So without further ado, Warden Amory is live now. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your title and what you do with the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
So my new title was relatively recent. I am the Information Education Supervisor, was promoted to that position in July. Prior to that, I was a state game warden with a district. We call them district wardens because that is the area that we tend to patrol, and it essentially is assigned to each officer out of the training school. You get an area of about 350 square miles, equivalent to roughly half of a county, and that's what I had for about 8 years. But I have since promoted into this information education supervisor position, and in my new role, I'm responsible for all the information and legislative contacts, all of the day-to-day operations of the Game Commission as it relates to pushing out information from the region. So we are broken into 6 regions across the state: Northwest, Southwest, North Central, South Central, Northeast, and Southeast. Each one of my counterparts in the other areas also conducts similar functions within the Game Commission. So basically serve as a press secretary now. I never thought I'd hear myself say that, but I do have a governmental affairs background. When I started down this track initially, I went to Gannon University and graduated from Gannon. I was a congressional aide. I was actually a congressional staffer. I went to Harrisburg to work for former Governor Ridge, and I have been an elected official. I was a city council member in the city of Meadville, so I do have a governmental affairs background, public administration degree, political science degree from Gannon University, which is how I kind of started down the path of governmental affairs. So I'm kind of migrating back towards something I did in a former life, I guess. I did run a nonprofit organization for about 8 years before becoming a game warden, and as I've said, I've been a game warden for about 8 years now.
Okay, so your background in essentially lines up with this information and education supervisory role. So that's fortuitous. Let's back up for a second. What spell out for us? What is the role of a game warden? As you said, you were patrolling. What do you guys do?
Yeah, the role of a state game warden, it's kind of confusing to most people, I think. We are essentially police officers. We have full police powers. We are empowered by Title 18, which is the Pennsylvania Crimes Code, and we're also empowered by Title 75, which is the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code. The only thing we do not do, the only thing different from a game warden than you would say from a state police officer, would be that we don't do summary traffic laws. So we don't drive around looking for people who are violating speeding laws or small moving violations, things like that. But we also tend to focus our energy on wildlife law. So Title 34, which is the Game and Wildlife Code within Pennsylvania, we focus primarily on that law and enforcing that law. So people have called us recreational law enforcement, and I'm not offended by that title at all, because my goal is, and it's stated as our goal, to defend that which cannot defend itself, and we provide a voice to the wildlife in Pennsylvania. That if there were no game wardens, I'm quite certain we would be right back to where we were in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we almost wiped out and did extirpate some species in Pennsylvania. So I think that my role as a game warden was to make sure there's compliance with the Game and Wildlife Code, and more specifically with the game laws. So when people are out and they are hunting and trapping, to make sure that they're not overbagging, which means taking more animals than what we can sustain, and that they are following the laws, and they're not harming or injuring one another. Also, we do have an aspect of the Game and Wildlife Code which just does provide safety mechanisms for people, such as wearing your fluorescent orange. That would be similar to a law that would say wear your motorcycle helmet or wear your safety belt when you're operating a motor vehicle. So we're there for people's safety and also to protect the resource.
Yeah, and that resource you had mentioned was prior to game laws, way back in the early 1900s, there was essentially you could do as you wanted. So how does the Game Commission determine? You mentioned bag limits or things like that. How does it determine that you can get this license for this animal?
Well, just to speak to your topic there, we actually, when we started out, we were refuge protectors. So we weren't game wardens, we were refuge protectors. We actually brought white-tailed deer back to Pennsylvania, and we put them in a fenced-in area called a refuge. And the game warden at the time was a refuge protector, and they would live there with their wife. And they would live right in the refuge and make sure that no one, killed the animals that were in the refuge, just to try to bring back wildlife populations, turkeys, things like that. So we have reintroduced a lot of species back to Pennsylvania that have now flourished, such as the bald eagle and the otter, and many others. But I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, how does the Game
Commission
determine like that one deer can be harvested, or one?
Sure. So I also would say that one way that we primary ways that we differ from the Pennsylvania State Police is they are a law enforcement agency. We are a wildlife agency with a law enforcement arm. So we do have about 870 employees, of which about 125 of those employees are game wardens. So we have a whole another arm of our agency that does nothing but just make certain that wildlife populations are healthy and sustainable. Our biologists attempt to try to figure out how many animals that we have each year through a variety of methods. Harvesting animals is one of the ways that we look at how our wildlife populations are doing. We actually try to get a good figure on the pulse of how many animals we're harvesting. And we do use the word harvesting rather than killing, because we harvest these animals in a sustainable way so that we can ensure that we don't take more than the population can sustain. And so the harvest count is one. In Pennsylvania, unfortunately, we do have a lot of animals that are road killed. So we do get a kind of a sense of how many animals are road killed and die from other causes. So we do samples with our biologists. They go out, they sample heads that are collected from after the harvest is done, and people turn their deer into a processing facility. And we just sometimes sample roadkills. So we do a variety of methods to try to just determine what the population of animals is in that area. And the biologists probably are better off at speaking to that than I am. But those are the ways that I'm aware of that we use.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get to the point that, and you did a great job explaining that there are a variety of different roles in the Pennsylvania Game Commission besides a warden like yourself, and you said biologists, and they keep the pulse on the animal population and whether or not hunters can harvest X, Y, or Z or numbers. That's super important. So tell us, Jason, a little bit about your interests, your abilities. If somebody wanted to go and work at the Pennsylvania Game Commission, what would they need to have ability wise or interest wise?
So there are a whole host of different tracks that you could take if you're within the Game Commission. We have foresters, we have biologists, we have habitat management workers. They used to call them food and cover workers. We do have some people who work as wild pheasant propagators. So they work propagating pheasants actually that we release. So we do have the biologist and biologist aides. Typically what you'll find is in each region there'll be a one biologist who is the wildlife management supervisor. So that is the lead biologist. And then he has a bunch of wildlife biologists underneath him. They call them diversity biologists. They also have techs that are on limited terms. So one of the ways, if you're interested in that aspect of things, or even forestry, for example, there's a regional forester and then a bunch of wildlife foresters that work underneath of him. But everything the Game Commission does, even forestry, is always with the I guess, the overarching goal of wildlife habitat. So if you're a forester for the Game Commission, you're not doing it just to market timber. You're not doing it just to make money. You're doing everything that you do is, if you're doing a shelter cut, if you're burning a field or a forest, if anything that you're doing under forestry within the Game Commission, you're always doing with the mindset of trying to improve wildlife habitat. So you have to have a goal, I would say. If you were interested in any aspect of the Game Commission, you would have to have a goal in your heart, not just to go out and make money, not just to go out, because we are civil servants. So your goal should be to improve wildlife habitat. So that's the number of wildlife that there are in Pennsylvania, the diversity of species in Pennsylvania, and our goal is to try to restore the ecology of Pennsylvania back to the way that it was before people screwed it up, essentially. And there really isn't any better way to state it than that. We left to our own devices, not all people, but there's a certain segment of the population that would decimate wildlife populations in Pennsylvania, and it's absolutely certain. It's been done before. I've seen it on a small scale. Anecdotally, I can tell you that it does happen. People just aren't able to check their own interest and think on a broader scale. So if you have an interest, you need to have wildlife, I'd say, primary in your thought process, and improving wildlife in your thought process. And then what you should do is, there are all different types of tracks to get here. It's funny because in my academy, for example, there were people that had prior military experience, people that were deputies that had served as deputy wildlife conservation officers at the time, now deputy game wardens. And they basically serve as a game warden only in a voluntary capacity. There were people that had come from private sector. Myself, I had been, as I said, pretty much a government affairs, government relations type person. But if you're going to be a game warden, you do have to be mindful of the fact there is a law enforcement component, and you would have to have the capacity to do law enforcement, because law enforcement is obviously something that you can't shy away from.
That's great to hear. So it sounds like you have a lot of abilities and interests in the legal side of things, as well as a love for wildlife, which leads you to your role. So what do you think you value the most about your role, whether it be in the education supervisor or as a warden?
Yeah, as a game warden, what I valued the most is that I didn't have to do day-to-day crime, and one of the things I liked was not being a road trooper. I didn't have to sit on the highway and write traffic tickets. I didn't have to go to domestic disputes or deal with sexual violence or some of the things that law enforcement officers have to encounter on a daily basis, the violence of it. And it's not to say that we couldn't encounter those very same scenarios, because we can and sometimes do, but it's not our primary role. Our primary role, as I said, was to enforce the wildlife laws. And the thing that I liked about it was that there was that focus for me. It took away from the typical law enforcement, I guess, the rigidity of a typical law enforcement life, where you're always dealing with the segment of the population that could sometimes make it difficult for you to keep your spirits up, I would say, maybe. I just didn't want to have to deal with that type of crime on a daily basis. And I really, what it came down to is, I was a hunter and a wildlife enthusiast, and I enjoyed that. And I liked the opportunity, if I wanted to, I could just go out and go for a walk, and be in nature and make it productive. I could walk the boundary of my game lands to look for illegal activities, such as tree stands that were left in too long, or people that were posting, encroaching on the game lands, or doing anything like that. So there is a segment of your job where you still are able to really connect to wildlife, connect to the outdoors, and still be out in that capacity, and always being mindful of the fact that we're helping wildlife. A lot of times I would get a hold of an injured bald eagle and be able to take that to a rehabilitator, or some other wildlife that we could rehabilitate. I've removed male deer from soccer nets before that were caught in soccer nets. Animals that have gotten into homes or into businesses and couldn't get their way out. And there just have been so many different varied types of experiences that I've had that most people would never even possibly anticipate that they could encounter. It was really a neat job, and I enjoyed it very much. The reason I moved into the information education role was because I'm now a supervisor. I can help the younger officers to develop their careers. I can also present the Game Commission in a better light and tell our story in a way that most people don't quite understand what the Game Commission even does. You can hear, I guess, for lack of a better term, you can hear an old redneck down at a local gas station talking about the game commission and maybe having a bad taste in his mouth from some experience he had in the past. And I understand, but things have evolved so much with our agency. We are truly a wildlife management agency. That is our primary goal. Everything that we do every day. When I wake up, I always say to myself, and it might sound corny, but I always say to myself, "What did you do for wildlife today?" And if I didn't do anything for wildlife today, then I really feel like that was a lost day for me. And now that I'm doing it looking out a window, it's a little more difficult. It's not as tangible. But whenever I, say, for example, can get a nice press release out, or if I can put a good story into the game news, or if I can help the younger wardens and younger officers in some way that day, I'm able to touch more people than what I could in a typical day just in my 350 square mile world that I used to have. We used to call it our kingdom. The 350 square miles is your kingdom, and everything that happens in there is your responsibility. But now the entire 10 county region essentially is my kingdom, and I'm trying to affect all of the organizations in that kingdom the best that I can. I'm trying to affect all the sportsmen's organizations, educate the legislators, all the education. We do a lot of educational outreach, so we provide materials to schools. We do programs for schools and for the public. And so there's a larger ability for me now, I think, to affect people on a larger scale than what I had before.
That's very admirable that you have that latitude to make those kind of decisions, to plug yourself into what you love on a day-to-day basis. I want to shout out to our attendees.
A good example.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, a good example is the Pymatuning Wildlife Center. There's a learning center out there that we had to tear down because it became old and it could no longer facilitate our mission there. So what we're going to do is we're going to build back a new one, and we're going to have a lot of connections with schools and educational partners, and we're really going to put a state-of-the-art facility out there, and that's going to affect the entire region. And that's going to be a great opportunity for a lot of the people in our area when it gets going.
Yeah,
but I have the lead on that, so.
I want to hear more information about that. But I want to shout out to our attendees that don't hesitate to throw any questions into our chat feature. We're going to transition to questions here very shortly, but that's great to hear. You know, that it's Warden Amory's responsibility to get information like that out about Pymatuning. I'm a lover. I'm a user of Pymatuning, and I'd love to hear more about that. But you mentioned a little bit about you dealing with John Q. Public. So as a warden, or in that role, what kind of skills do you have to work with the public?
Well, I've always said to people that our officers excel at communication. The difference between a typical police officer and a game warden is you'll notice that a game warden will use their mouth quite effectively. And I'm not saying that other officers don't, and in no way want to diminish their roles or their capacity, but they may come in with a more stern officer presence type of approach. We would come into it with a much softer educational approach, trying to gain what we call voluntary compliance. And our goal is not to be authoritative in all instances. You do have to have officer presence and maintain that presence in order for your own safety, and always be aware of the possibility of criminal activity that could be there. But for the most part, as I said, we're recreational law enforcement, and so we're trying not to intrude on a person's recreation while at the same time making certain that they're in compliance with the law. So you'll notice our officers are much more adept and much more diversified in their knowledge base. You can be an educator one day. You can be doing a hunter-trapper education course or a public event. You may be putting on some public event, educating the public, and these are just our normal game wardens that do this. You may actually get questions from someone at the local gas station. You know, you do a lot of education, and you do a lot of communication. So our guys and girls are very adept at utilizing their mouth, and I say at de-escalating situations. I always notice game wardens have a much more conversational role than what you would ever notice maybe with a normal police officer. And I think even a lot of our police officers are starting to realize the value in that. But our game wardens do a really good job out of it. They are very diversified in their knowledge base. These are people that are pretty well educated. Almost everyone in my class had some form of secondary education. Some of them had master's degrees. Most all of us had at least a bachelor's degree. So they're well educated. The class does a very good job. It's a 1-year in-house Ross Leffler School of Conservation, where they do a good job of educating you in all the roles and education bases that you'll need to have when you get out in the field. But again, our officers just do a fantastic job of being very well diversified and very good at using their mouths.
That's a great segue, actually, because I was going to ask you next, does it require any form of formal education to work for the Game Commission?
You do have to have 60 credit hours now, or what they call the equivalent of 60 credit hours. So if you have those 60 credit hours, it's basically an associate's degree, or if you have been a deputy for 2 full years, I believe it is the new requirement. So if someone doesn't have the associates, but yet they want to become a deputy, that's one track to get into the class, and that is the requirement. It used to be a high school degree equivalency or degree, but now it's moved to 60 credit hours.
I see. Okay, so if somebody wanted to aspire to become a warden, then you could become a volunteer deputy, and those 60 hours over the course of 2 years would qualify them for potentially to be a warden.
You could have a high school education and become a deputy, and you have to get a minimum number of hours each year as a deputy. I believe it's 200 hours. And once you get those 200 hours in as a deputy each year, that's credit. That's a year's credit. Once you get 2 years credit, that would suffice to get you into the class, even with a high school degree. So you could basically forego the degree requirement if you were a deputy. I guess they're doing the on-the-job training at that point and considering that to be equal to, the knowledge you would maybe acquire in associates. So equivalent experience and training.
Okay. That seems to be a common message across every profession we talk about, is that some form of post-secondary education is going to be an integral part of becoming an employee with the Game Commission. So as we transition, Go ahead.
Well, Nick, I can tell you from personal experience, there's always the minimum requirement, but if you attempted to function at the minimum requirement, you'd have a difficult time getting in the Game Commission. It's a very competitive organization as far as trying to gain entry. I'm not saying it can't be done. I was told that it couldn't be done at one time in my career, and here I sit. But I did go, and I acquired, as I said, I acquired a bachelor's degree, about 20 years of professional work experience, and it's a very competitive process to get into that academy. So the more education you have, the more diversified your education is, the more adept you are at communication, and obviously now your computer skills and everything that we do is incorporated into these computers now. We have personal video recorders that we are responsible for maintaining, all those interactions with the public, downloading those, categorizing those. We run a computer automated dispatch system on our computers. We have an Avail program on our computers. We all run email. So it's basically a mobile office now for us. So we are really, really well integrated now into the technological world.
Yeah, I can see how that will be an essential skill. So as we transition to our questions, and for the audience out there, feel free to throw your questions in. Let's talk about something fun, something interesting that maybe happened to you throughout the course of your career with the Game Commission, something that you were like, wow, I can't believe that actually happened.
It's funny because it almost happens every day. There is some experience on a daily basis that you couldn't have possibly anticipated that will come up. Our officers are able to administer Schedule II drugs. So we administer ketamine and xylazine. It's a cocktail that we use to immobilize bears, for example, and other wildlife whenever we're processing them. And by processing them, I mean that we're looking them over to ensure that they don't have any major injuries. We may be relocating them from an area where they were causing conflict to an area where there's lesser concentrations of black bears and better habitat for them. We very rarely have to destroy the animals, but we do have to move them. So we use live traps in order to catch them, and then we dart them. We use this drug cocktail that I talked about. We also use an antagonist, which is a reversal drug that wakes them back up out of the paralytic after we've been done processing them. We take a tooth, we ear tag them with ear tags so that they can be identified in the future if we need to. If a hunter would harvest them, we have it's a capture. What it is actually is a capture study. So once we've captured them and we've processed them and they go out and they return back to us in the form of a harvest, for example, we can take the information from them at the time. We know their sex, their age, approximately how long it's been since they were last processed by us, and it gives us a lot of information about the dispersion of the animals, their population, things like that. So one of the good experiences that I had in the past was to just trap bears in all different types of scenarios that you could possibly imagine. One time we trapped a black bear in downtown Oil City that was in the top of a tree, and it would not come down. Sometimes when they get scared, they just climb higher and higher. So we actually had a ladder truck, and I was in a ladder truck with a hose spraying water on a bear. So if you get the water above the bear, he would climb down. If you could get the water below the bear, he would climb up. So we actually pushed him down out of the tree. We were able to dart him. We threw the bear in the back of my vehicle and drove down the road as fast as we could to get the bear out of the city in an area where we could process the bear and get him on his way before he woke back up. And it's always a touchy kind of a situation because you never know how a bear is going to metabolize the drug, how they're going to process that drug. So essentially, you never really know how much time you have. If you have the opportunity to sit and evaluate the bear, you can give additional doses, partial doses of the drug to the bear to help keep them at a state where you can work with them. But obviously, when they're back at your truck, you can't do that. So we've done things like that. I've waded through creeks about waist deep for miles to try to catch a injured eagle before, and was able to see that eagle be reintroduced back into the wild. I had a rabid bobcat one time that was underneath of a person's porch that I actually had to euthanize and remove. So there have been a lot of really crazy, really neat experiences through the years that sometimes it's hard to believe that I was even able to have those experiences, because it was just so, a lot of times, so really cool when you have an opportunity to sit back and just say to yourself, my goodness, I get to do this every day and they pay me for it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's very rewarding. I remember reading about that bobcat. That was you, huh?
Yeah, that was me. That was pretty crazy because when I showed up, the bobcat was actually really vocalizing, and it's pretty scary when you show up and you have a bobcat that's already attacked a couple people, and now it's vocalizing pretty hard. What I was able to do is actually take a butter knife and put it down in between the slats of the porch, and it was able to get the bobcat to chomp onto the butter knife, and you could see the porcupine quills in its face, which was an indication that it had already taken on a porcupine, and that's not something that a healthy animal will do. So I was able to determine where its face was, and I was able to euthanize it through the floorboards of the porch. So it was quite an experience.
That's cool.
I certainly wasn't going to crawl under there with the thing.
Yeah, don't blame you. So we had a question come in. I think you already talked about what you like most about your career. Is there anything you don't like about your career?
Well, I never have been a person who really loves the administrative workload that you have. I mean, I'm a civil servant, and I do work for it's not a government agency, so we're not an agency, we're a commission. So we're a state-related agency, so we're not directly under the auspices of state government, but we do work in connection to, and in some ways, like financially, for example, we're directly under the governor's office. But I never really loved the bureaucracy. Wasn't a person who ever really loved that, which is funny because I've kind of migrated to a lot of positions where I was just inundated with bureaucracy. That's one of the things that I've struggled with in my career, because I sometimes struggle to find the value in all the paperwork and all of the administration and all of the things that you see that, in my opinion, I had a guy one time tell me, when you're in business, to be in business, that's not a good thing. And sometimes I struggle with that aspect of it. Are we in business in some aspects to be in business? I don't like that part of it. Now, the wildlife part of it, you can see tangible results. It's exciting. It's good. And I know that there's a necessity for the bookkeeping side, the administrative side. It's just sometimes, I don't know if it's my personality or what, but I just struggle with it sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone there. I think every position has that. And,
yeah, it's rough, but it's part of the game.
Yep, necessary. So somebody had posted a question. What are some of the benefits you could acquire as a game warden? So I'm not sure if they mean necessarily like your medical benefits, or I think you talked a lot about your personal benefits. You want to share about the?
Yeah, you don't go into civil service to get rich. But with that being said, we do have a pretty solid retirement right now. You see a lot of organizations are moving government agencies and government entities towards 401ks. And not to get too technical, that's just a different type of, that's an IRS designation for a retirement system that you would have. We still have pensions, so we are still under the pension system. We are still considered to be law enforcement, so we were cut out of that. We're not moved into a traditional 401k. We're still on a pension. So when you retire, you will have a percentage of all of your years of service at the end. Your 3 highest years, you'll take a percentage of that. It's around 50 to 75%, depending on how long you were in service. 50 to 75% of your last 3 years average salary, you'll receive that for the rest of your life. You'll also receive health care for you and your family until you transition onto Medicare. So on the back end, it's a really lucrative pension and really lucrative medical benefit that you receive. While you're in service, you have so many days of annual leave, so many days of sick leave, which are really good. I mean, for the most part, you couldn't exhaust, unless you had some major medical event, you couldn't exhaust all the sick leave that the state gives you. And at the end, they'll buy it back from you at about 50% of its value. And then also they'll buy back all of your annual time. So I carry over about 9 weeks of annual leave without even touching the 3 to 4 weeks that I'm given per year. So I have that in the bank. I have 9 weeks of annual time in the bank that I don't even touch. And it takes about 8 to 10 years to get to that level of seniority where you have that. And then you just take your 3 or 4 years vacation every year and you don't even touch the 9 weeks you have. The salary, excuse me, I'm still suffering from COVID, but the salary is pretty good. When you come out of the academy, you're making about $40,000 a year. You get annual increases, and you'll get those increases for about 20 years until you max out. So most of our wardens are making probably in the neighborhood. I'd say an average salary for an average warden is probably in the 50 to 60,000 range right now. If we're just talking hard dollars, how much are people making? Obviously, supervisory roles are a little more. We do have some special duties. We have law enforcement supervisors, information education supervisors. We have a federal aid supervisor, and then a land management supervisor, and then also a regional director. So those are positions you could ascend into. Also, game wardens are the only people that are allowed to go into a land management group supervisor role. And a land manager is responsible for all of the game lands within about a 2-county territory, and they are responsible for all the wildlife management people within those areas. So that's kind of a managerial role that you can also promote into as a game warden if you're interested in just mainly the wildlife habitat and wildlife management side.
So one of the other questions, Jason, that had come in was, what was one of the scariest things that you've ever had to deal with?
Well, the scariest things that I've dealt with have been, for example, I was on a wildlife, it was called a tactical woodland tracking team. It's basically the Game Commission SWAT team. And I was on that team for about 5 years, and we were tasked with fugitive recovery. And so when someone runs off into the woods, for example, and they've committed a felony and they need to be retrieved, a lot of times traditional law enforcement, they're not used to going off the pavement. They're not used to being out in the woods. Game wardens, we live our life in the woods. So they would send us in tracking those individuals to try to recover them. And Eric Freen was an individual who killed Corporal Dixon in the Northeast in Blooming Grove. And I was a part of, and he also wounded another trooper. I was a part of a 45-day recovery effort to try to attempt to apprehend and bring Eric Freen to justice, and we were able to ultimately do that. That was a pretty scary situation. I've also been in some situations, like I said, where I've had bears that were under the effect of immobilization. We're able to come out of that pretty quickly and recover. So you're dealing with a 300 or 400 pound black bear that's now relatively back to normal. And you're in close proximity to him. It can be kind of scary. So
yeah, I would much rather do a bear than a fugitive.
Yeah, the law enforcement side of it can get scary. Most of the time you've been trained so well that you don't feel that fear at the time. You don't freeze up, and you don't feel that fear at the time. But when you look back on it in hindsight and say to yourself, wow, that's a pretty sketchy situation. That's how it kind of happens. You reflect back on it and think to yourself, you've been trained so well that you just react, and your training kicks in, and you really don't think about the fear at the time.
So for our educators that are on the call, what kind of programs does the Game Commissioner would you be able to offer to our schools? This is another question that came in.
Yeah, we have a host of things. Right now, we're pushing the Wildlife on Wi-Fi program that we've rolled out, and that has a lot of virtual educational opportunities for educators on there. They should all go and check that out. And if they have any questions, they can certainly call me about it. And we do have wildlife educators that are employed by the Game Commission that can do. We just did a class for Lakeview, one of the Lakeview schools, their classes. So we did a virtual delivery of animals, wildlife surviving the winter, and it was a really good course that I thought that our educator did a nice job. They're kind of transitioning that role onto some of our information education supervisors, such as myself. But any game warden can go out and present a program. They can come right into the schools. They can do a fur kit program. They can do living with bears, or they can do a black bear educational program. They can do one on eagles. Our game wardens are really adept at education because they do teach hunter trapper education frequently. So they're used to dealing with kids. They're used to speaking on their level, and kind of like bringing it down to or up to whatever level they're dealing with. We can go from kindergarten classes clear through, senior high school, or even college. Or I've taught to civic organizations and civic groups. So we're really adept at delivering those programs. We have wildlife notes on almost any species in Pennsylvania, and we really could assist and in fact, it's something that we should push more. Our educators should definitely utilize the Game Commission more if they're looking, to deliver some curriculum. We have a ton of resources available to them.
That's good to know. And for our audience I put Jason's contact information in there, your email address, as well as Ann. Thank you Ann for posting that, and put the link to Wildlife on Wi-Fi into the announcements too. So check that out, and we'll be happy to share that through our region. We want to respect your time, Warden Amory. Why don't you, do you have any parting words for our audience in terms of directions, advice?
I would say that right now, the Game Commission has never needed game wardens more than we do. It's kind of funny because wildlife populations are so abundant now that people don't really see the need for game wardens. Okay, so we were obviously in need whenever we had hunted populations to the point where they were no longer sustainable, and we extirpated some of those populations from Pennsylvania. But in my opinion, game wardens have never been more needed than they are now, and it's really difficult to attract people into law enforcement right now because of the environment. But it's especially difficult to attract people into our line of work because we just have a difficult time finding an individual who's so well-rounded and can be a game warden. So we only select a very few people. For example, the state police might run multiple classes with hundreds of people in those classes at each time. There may be 5,000 state police at any given time. There's only 125 state game wardens in the entire state of Pennsylvania at full complement. To give you an example, right now we're almost at 10 vacancies within the Northwest region. 10 vacancies is roughly half of our entire field force. So we were really old at one point, and now we're going really young. So we actually were able to gain law enforcement retirement, which means you'd have to work 25 years of service or be 55 years of age with 25 years of service. So if you attain those two levels, you can retire. So a lot of our guys were at that level, and they've started to retire, and now we have to backfill them. So if you want to be a game warden, I would say don't let anyone tell you no. That's the first key. Don't listen to people when they tell you you can't get this job, because you absolutely can get this job. If I could get the job, anyone can get the job. It's just a matter of being persistent and being progressive in the way that you acquire your education. Know your goals. If you want to be a game warden, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to be out there pursuing some track that's completely opposite from what you want to go and focus on wildlife. You want to focus on I would say any English majors would do great at this job. Anyone with I always tell people, don't go primarily, everybody thinks you want to go into criminal justice. I would say criminal justice doesn't really have any applicability outside of criminal justice, So unless you absolutely know that that's what you want to do, I would say get a more diversified degree. I took political science, English, all those majors would do well. Those people would do well in this field. We've had people from all different walks of life. People who go into the military are great candidates then to be able to come into the Game Commission, because it is kind of a paramilitary lifestyle that you have to lead. The thing I would leave people with is this is not a job. And if someone looks for a job, a 9 to 5, punch the clock, go home, this isn't the job for you, because this is a lifestyle. We've always told people it's a lifestyle. You are on call 24/7, 365. You will have injured owls in your living room with your little kids. You know, this job will really become a lifestyle for you. And you will love it so much that you will just completely immerse yourself into it. And already 10 years has almost gone by for me, and I can't even believe that it's happened. It was just yesterday I was in the academy. But it's a job that I love so much, and that we all love so much, that we really pour ourselves into. A lot of times we have to talk our guys down and help them understand that, you need to maintain a life outside of the game commission as well, and you need to be, a good family man, and a good person for your community, and have other interests, because the job is so all encompassing and so enthralling that you want to be involved in it all the time. But if you're interested in it, make sure that you acquire the education. You need to have at least an associate's degree, and you can't have any background that's going to preclude you from going into law enforcement. So you have to be mindful of that as well. But that's what I would say.
Question came in: are you able to be a game warden as a side job? Is there any kind of? Can you talk a little bit more about that deputy program if you wanted to work for the game commission?
Yeah. So the deputy program, we used to have about 1,200 deputies in the state of Pennsylvania. We're under 300 right now. The deputy program is, you're essentially a game warden, but they call you a deputy game warden because the requirement, you have to go to Harrisburg for 2 weeks, and you have to obtain 80 hours of ride-along time with a game warden, and then you have to have 100 total hours of ride-along time with someone in the game commission, either a deputy, senior deputy, or a game warden. But we do reimburse those people up to $80 per day, and we do that until our budget is exhausted. A lot of our people tell us it's in the maybe $5,000 a year range, the reimbursements, but a lot of times those people will spend as much or more money on the agency than they will actually get back. So it's basically a volunteer position. It is a position where these people value it enough, and they've obtained a level in their own careers where they feel like giving back, and they feel like they are in a position in their life to where they can give back, and this is the avenue that they choose. Like any other volunteer, people all choose different organizations to put their energy into, but the Game Commission has been a beneficiary of many people throughout the years that have decided to do it as volunteers.
That's great. So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a deputy would be kind of like a side job or a part-time job?
Yeah, it would be a part-time job, essentially, but we really wouldn't tell anyone to expect to be able to make enough money to sustain themselves in any kind of a way. It's more for people who have obtained a level in their profession where they feel like they have some extra time to give, and they don't need that income source.
Yeah.
It's a little different, but it is also a way that if you wanted to become a game warden, for example, and you didn't want to go obtain an associate's degree, it's a way to get around the degree requirement. So you will obtain on-the-job education. You'll be mentored by a game warden. You'll learn everything you need to know about being a game warden, and it's a great way to get in if you don't have the means to go get that associate's degree, if you're not in a position in your life to be able to do that. So you're working a job and you want to spend a little bit of time every year, you're going to, you'd spend a lot more time acquiring an associate's degree than you would on the couple hundred hours each year that you'd have to spend as a deputy. So it's much more obtainable to someone.
Sure.
And let's face it, you're going to be in a classroom, or you're going to be in a truck with me doing the job every day. If you're in the truck with me doing the job every day, you're going to learn pretty quickly whether A, you're interested, and B, you have the aptitude to do the job. Because let's face it, everyone wants to do certain things. I tell people, I've had cadets before that were in my car, and I said, look, I wanted to be a concert pianist, but I'm just not cut out to be a concert pianist. I'm a game warden, and that's what I was made for. And once you find out what your aptitudes are and what your interests are and what your abilities are, and you marry those things together, that's when you have a career that you can really enjoy. A lot of people are mismatched. They go into some job just trying to chase a dollar, for example, and then they realize that it's unfulfilling because the work's just something they don't have any interest in or don't care about at all. I love the work that I do. I happen to be good at it, and so I was able to marry my interests with my aptitudes, and that really allowed me to excel. I said I was like a fish flopping on the bank until I became a game warden. It was like somebody kicked me in the water, and I just swam because that's what I love to do. And fortunately, I'm pretty good at it.
That's great. And I think you brought up a great point that we use a cheesy saying here, you're networking, you're not working. So those volunteer deputy hours are going to put you in contact with people like you. And then you're going to have your foot in the door, metaphorically. So.
Our deputies are incredible people. And, you know, there's people that do it for two different reasons. We do have people that look to use this as a stepping stone, the deputy program. It's a great way to get in and actually do the job. You're actually physically doing the job with a game warden as your mentor, and you would figure out pretty quickly whether or not it's something you want to do. And obviously the agency is going to figure out whether or not you're the type of person who can do it, because you're thrown into the deep end of the pool and given an opportunity to do the job. So there aren't very many other opportunities where you can go in and just literally do the job of a game warden, find out whether or not you like it, and then take the class. If you choose to, you can go to the class. As I said, the class is a 1-year in-service academy at the Ross Leffer School of Conservation.
Very good. So, Warden Amory, I want to respect your time, and I want to say special thanks to all of our attendees out there who stuck with us through the technical difficulties, and want to also shout out that we have recorded this session with Warden Amory, and we're going to be posting it onto our website under the recordings tab. So there will be under the law enforcement component of our website. So check that out. And I want to say thank you to Warden Amory for connecting with us, and I hope you feel better. And for our attendees,
You too.
Stay safe.
Thanks, sir.